I'm Carson Horn, and it's time for another edition of Talkin' Tumors, where I break down the latest happenings in Auburn athletics. Let's get rolling. Auburn football is just a month away. Can you feel it? It is almost here. Maybe it's excitement for you. Maybe it's some nerves for you. Maybe it's even dread. But nonetheless, it is coming. August 29th will be here before we know it. The summer is rolling by very, very quickly. And we're going to talk about what are the expectations for this season. Hugh Freeze laid that out last week at SEC Media Days, and we talked about it on the show last week, but we're going to discuss it once again and whether the expectations, maybe they're too high. Are they? I'll address that question. And just because we're talking about Auburn football does not mean we're going to ignore Auburn basketball. We're going to talk about some impact transfers for the Tigers, which is nearly the whole team. Who could have the biggest impact from the non-Power 5 level for college basketball? We'll dive into that question and go over a few players I think can have a big impact this year that are stepping up a level. For Auburn, we will look at Gene Chizik's legacy. These are always fun segments to do in the summertime where we have a little bit more time on our hands. So we'll talk about Gene Chizik and what is his legacy at Auburn as we are now 15 years have passed since Auburn won the national championship in 2010. This upcoming season will be 15 years since that. So we'll discuss that. And we'll continue our summer opponent preview discussing Vanderbilt on today's show. So we've got a full show as always on this edition of Talkin' Tumors. I am Carson Horn. Thank you so much for being tuned in, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the podcast. I'd ask if you please subscribe to the show if you haven't already, and give us a like if you're watching on YouTube. With that, let's get rolling now with our first segment. So, are the expectations too high for Auburn this upcoming season? Well, to answer that question, I first have to lay out, what are the expectations this upcoming year for Auburn? Well, I'm going to take what Hugh Freeze said, and Hugh Freeze's expectations are that Auburn is going to compete and going to be in the conversation for the college football playoff. So those are the expectations. Auburn is going to compete and be in that college football playoff race. Are those expectations too high? Some might say yes. My answer is absolutely not. Why is it not too high? Because it's Auburn, and Auburn has had back-to-back top 10 recruiting classes, a top 20 class in the year that Hugh Freeze took over, the season after he took over. Auburn had a top 20 class that year, and then back-to-back top 10 classes. It is year 3 for Hugh Freeze at Auburn now. Auburn fans understood that there was a big rebuild that had to take place because of what was left from Brian Harsin, even some from what was left from Gus Malzahn. A lot of things needed to be cleaned up. The roster needed to be improved. There needed to be a complete overhaul of how things were being done at Auburn. But you're also in this age now with the transfer portal where you see teams and programs to be able to flip the script rather quickly. Auburn took a more old-school approach. Hugh Freeze took a more old-school approach in how he wanted to rebuild this Auburn program. He decided to go through the high school ranks and focus on that and not try to spend too many resources on the transfer portal and look for a microwave fix, if you will, meaning having a little lightning in a bottle type of season, but not necessarily sustaining success. And we've seen that backfire for programs such as Florida State. And I agreed with that. I also pointed out that I thought Hugh Freeze could have threaded the needle a little bit better and could have been better in year 1 and year 2 while also building for the future. I think he could have done a better job there than he did. But the past is in the past now. That's irrelevant at this point. It is year 3. You've had time now to get your program how you want it. There's no more excuses. The talent level is where it needs to be for Auburn to be competitive and for Auburn to have a really good season this year. Auburn's roster has a 64% blue chip ratio. That may sound like French to you, so let me explain to you what that is if you do not know what that means. That means that 64% of Auburn's roster is made up of 4- and 5-star players. That's really good. This is the highest blue chip ratio Auburn has had since this formula was created back a little over a decade ago by Bud Elliott of CBS Sports. That's who does this. And this percentage also puts Auburn in the top 15 as far as talent rosters go if you go based on 4- and 5-star recruits. We know talent does not guarantee success, but as I like to say, without talent, you're guaranteed to fail. You have to have, or at least not have the success that you would like to have. Auburn has the pieces now to succeed, has the talent now to succeed, and the stats back that up. This is the most talented Auburn roster since 2017, and you could make an argument that it is more talented than that 2017 roster. It just may not be as experienced as that roster was in that season. And then finally, there's been an incredible amount of resources invested into this Auburn program since Hugh Freeze became the head coach, not just in recruiting, but in facilities. And you have the brand new football facility. I know that was started before Hugh Freeze became the head coach, but it did not open until he became the head coach at Auburn. And again, the money that has been poured in NIL, from the boosters to the stadium renovations, the support has been there. The resources are there. So absolutely, these expectations are totally fair in year 3 for Hugh Freeze. These should be the expectations from here on out, that Auburn should be competing for the SEC, should be in the playoff race each and every year with a chance to win an SEC championship and with a chance to win a national championship. Now, are those fair expectations this year for Auburn to necessarily win the SEC and win a national championship? I wouldn't go that far, but to say that Auburn should be in the playoff race, absolutely. Those are fair expectations to have this season, and those are expectations that Auburn fans should have for their program. If Auburn is going to pride itself on being a top 15 program in college football, you should absolutely have those expectations, and Auburn does this upcoming season. However, while having those expectations, there are reasons to be cautious and to be a little bit concerned that Auburn might not reach that this year. Starting with number one is that Hugh Freeze has not come anywhere close to that the previous 2 years. And I'll repeat this phrase again. What has been does not necessarily mean what will be. But what has been has not been good for Auburn these past 2 years. Auburn has vastly underachieved, even with the limited roster talent that Auburn has had in the last 2 years. Auburn still should have beaten a lot of teams that it did not beat, for a variety of reasons. But ultimately it falls on Hugh Freeze because he is the head coach at Auburn. Auburn won 5 games last year. Inexcusable. Shouldn't have happened. Auburn had the ability to win 8 or 9 games last season. The talent was good enough to do that. Auburn lost games to teams that were a lot less talented than they were. 2 years ago, Auburn went 6-7, had chances to beat Alabama, had chances to beat Georgia, despite having a much, much less talented roster than both of those teams. Underachieved, I would say, even in year 1 for Hugh Freeze based on what Auburn could have. Also, number 2, Hugh Freeze expanding past his Auburn history now. Hugh Freeze has only won more than 8 games 4 times in his 12 seasons as a head coach. Not great. And that brings me back to the selling point of Hugh Freeze when he was hired at Auburn. The selling point from John Cohen when he hired Hugh Freeze to be the next head football coach at Auburn a couple of years ago was that this was going to allow Hugh Freeze to be the best version of himself that he's ever been. Because you were going to put him in a place in Auburn that he was going to have the most resources and support that he's ever had. Auburn thought of him as a great offensive mind and a really good recruiter. So you pair that in a place like Auburn, where he was going to have the resources to recruit top 10 classes, which has occurred. You pair that with an ability to coach offense like we thought he could, like John Cohen, like Auburn fans thought he could, like he did at Liberty and like he did at Ole Miss. That should make for a pretty good pairing for him to reach his full potential as a head coach. That was the selling point for Auburn. It wasn't necessarily what he had done, although that was part of it, him beating Alabama, him having a 10-win season at Arkansas State and at Ole Miss and at Liberty. Those were selling points, but that wasn't the main focal point of the hire of Hugh Freeze. It was what could be for Hugh Freeze. But he hasn't come anywhere close to that at this point of his Auburn tenure. And so that should give Auburn fans some reason for some concern, absolutely, of whether or not he can get the job done. And he's only won 10 games he has never won 10 games in a regular season. He's done it based on he's gone 9-3 and then won a bowl game to get to 10-3. He won 10 games at Arkansas State, won 10 games at Liberty, went 9-4 at Ole Miss, along with a 10-win season there. So he's had 4 good seasons, but he hasn't had an elite season yet, and he hasn't consistently delivered above 8 wins. That was his mantra. His identity was he was at least going to give you 8 wins. That was one of the things that when he was hired at Auburn that I thought, said, well, he may not take Auburn to the next level, but Hugh Freeze will at least deliver 8 wins a year. He did it, I believe, 4 times at least 4 times at Ole Miss, but he hasn't even done that to this point. He has underachieved even to that level. That gives should give Auburn fans some signs for concern. But to wrap up this segment, to answer the question that we started with, these are fair expectations. The expectations for Auburn to compete for a playoff spot, have a chance to compete for championships, absolutely fair this year and in the years to come. Whether or not Auburn can actually meet those expectations that Hugh Freeze has laid out and that Auburn fans expect is a completely different story. I have my concerns, as do many Auburn fans, about that. Okay, continuing on now, shifting gears to Auburn basketball, I wanted to address a question about which non-Power 5 transfer could have the biggest impact for Auburn this season. So Auburn brought in, I believe, 10 or 11 new faces, I get the math wrong, to this Auburn basketball team this year. The only returning player is Tahad Pettiford. Auburn had 3 high school signees and I believe 7 transfers come in. You had a couple transfers from other Power 5 leagues, including Keyshawn Murphy, who came from Mississippi State in the SEC. You had Keyshawn Hall, transferred from UCF. You had Kevin Overton from Texas Tech. But Auburn brought in multiple transfers from lower levels, whether that was JUCO, D2, or even Europe. So I wanted to go through those guys and give you who I think could have the biggest impact for Auburn basketball this season, just to give you an update on where Auburn basketball is right now. They're still working out, going through their summer practices. They are limited on the amount of hours and time they can spend doing that, but that process is still ongoing for Auburn. They are scheduled to have an exhibition game in Birmingham in mid-October, and then we'll open the season in November. As of recording this podcast on Monday, July 21st, it is, Auburn has yet to release its full schedule. At this moment, I don't know. That could happen anytime. Some other programs have already done so. Auburn has not as of today when I'm recording this. When that happens, we'll break it down a little bit more. But we do know the majority of Auburn's opponents, but there may be a few things still being finalized there. But okay, back to the question now. Which non-Power 5 transfer could have the biggest impact for Auburn this season? So let me give you the guys who are transferring in first so you know the options here. Have Abdul Bashir, was one of the leading scorers in JUCO last year. He is transferring to Auburn. Really great scorer. Elijah Freeman is a D2 transfer. Emeka Oporum is another JUCO transfer. And then Philip Jovic is a European, I don't know if you call him a transfer if they're coming from Europe, but he signed with Auburn, has played professionally in Europe. And he is my answer. This is who I believe will have the biggest impact for Auburn this season from the non-Power 5 transfer level. I'm really high on Philip Jovic. He is 6'8", 225. That's how he's listed on Auburn's roster. He averaged over 12 points per game, 4 rebounds, and 57% from the field in his professional Euro League in Serbia, I believe it is, where he's come from. I like his potential. The biggest question mark with all these guys is how is it going to translate to the SEC? That's the biggest unknown. But Philip Jovic's athleticism stands out to me. When watching him play, the little bit that I've gotten to do that, his athleticism is impressive. And I do believe that is going to translate to the SEC. I think he's going to be a really good stretch for Auburn. He has solid handles for his size. And I think his ability to score is really good. He needs to continue to work on being able to score away from the basket, continue to work on his three-point shot. We've seen bigs come into Auburn like Janai Broome, like Jalen Williams and others through the years that have come in, maybe haven't had a great three-point shot and have improved it during their time at Auburn. I feel like that could be the case for Philip Jovic as well. but I really think he has a really solid chance of starting this season at the 4 for Auburn. Now, the concern is he is just now arriving in Auburn. He arrived this weekend, according to both Justin Hokanson of On 3 and Nathan King of 24/7 Sports. Filip Jovic was later arriving, so he's missed a lot of the summer practices and conditioning, but he has been playing basketball. He's just been doing it in Europe. So how quickly can he develop chemistry with his new teammates? That will be a big question mark, but if he can develop that chemistry and if he can to figure out that adjustment to playing in the SEC, I think he has a chance to be a major contributor and have a big impact on Auburn's team this year. I don't think it'll be as big of a transition speed and physicality-wise for him as it might be for some of the other guys coming from JUCO or Division II, and that's why I think he will have the biggest impact for Auburn in this season. But I could be wrong on that. These other guys that I've laid out could certainly have a major impact. They're all going to have a role for Auburn. There's no doubt about that. They will all play an important role. It's just the question mark is how big of an impact will they have? Elijah Freeman is one that's really popular, I think, for Auburn fans. He's the Division II transfer. He averaged 19 points per game last season, shooting 59% from the field, shot 46% from three, and grabbed 8.7 rebounds per game. I'm hesitant, though, to say he's going to have the biggest impact because I remember the transition for Chaney Johnson. Chaney Johnson wasn't as successful as a D2 player as Elijah Freeman has been, but I remember it took Chaney a little bit to adjust to the speed of the SEC, to the physicality of the SEC, and by year 2, Chaney was a really good player. But I think that could be the situation that Elijah Freeman finds himself in. It takes a little bit to adjust to how the game is played and also adjusting to not being the guy, but being just another player. While he might be an important player, he was the star at the D2 level. He was the guy that always had the ball in his hands. That's not going to be the case at Auburn. Can he figure out how to play around someone like Janai Broome and Keyshawn Hall and Keyshawn Murphy, who are going to be some of Auburn's most important players this season? And that's the reason I think there might be a little bit slower of development for Elijah Freeman. That's not to be down on him and not to say that he won't have a big impact. And he could certainly develop quicker than I anticipate and be the most impactful of this group. But I'm a little bit more hesitant to go there, and that's why I like Filip Jovic a little bit ahead of Elijah Freeman on this list. You also have Abdul Bashir, who averaged 19.4 points per game last year in JUCO, shooting 46% from the field and 45% from three. I am slightly concerned about Abdul Bashir, one, because of his size. Very skinny, very slender build, similar to Chad Baker-Mazara. And also, he's been out a lot this summer with injury. Hasn't been able to participate in a lot of things because of an injury. I don't know how severe. Of course, we haven't been able to really talk to Bruce Pearl about player status because it's the off season, but he has been out some. We do know that. So I am concerned about that. Has he been able to get in the weight room and at least gain weight and make physical gains that could help him when he's able to get back at it on the basketball court? That I don't know. Hopefully we'll get the answer to that at some point soon. But again, you also have the transition here from being the star at the JUCO level to being another piece on this team. He has potential to start at the 2 with his ability to shoot. He's a fantastic shooter, and that's going to be really important. He offers great size and length, but how will he be defensively? It's going to be a big question mark for him and Elijah Freeman and Filip Jovic, for all these guys. How will that translate to the SEC? And then finally, Emeka Oporum. He is the guy who I think the most raw of this group. Over 7 feet tall, coming from the JUCO ranks. He's athletic, he's big, he's long, but he's got to develop. He's going to have to develop his offensive skills. He could remind us a little bit of a Stretch Akingbola. He could remind us of a young Dylan Cardwell, where they can offer you some solid minutes defensively and rebounding, but they have a ways to go offensively. And that's kind of my expectation for Emeka Oporum. I don't expect him to offer a ton on the offensive end, but if he can offer you good defense and good rebounding, I think that's all that you can hope for in year 1 for him if you're Auburn this year. But for all these guys, how they step up in level of competition will ultimately dictate their success and how impactful they can be for Auburn this upcoming season. I cannot wait to see how it all plays out. One thing I love about Bruce Pearl is, look, he goes and tries to find some guys that were under recruited, maybe undervalued, guys that have chips on their shoulder. And he looks to the JUCO ranks. He looks to the D2 ranks. He looks to the mid-major ranks to go and grab these guys and try to give them an opportunity at the highest level he can in college basketball to compete, and it has often paid off. Again, one of the best players in college basketball last year, Janai Broome, came from the mid-major. Chad Baker-Mazar came from JUCO. He gives these guys opportunities, and usually they make the most of them, and I would guess that this group of guys right here will make the most of their opportunity and will all be impactful players for Auburn this upcoming season and in future seasons to come. Okay, moving back to football now as I reach for my water here as you're watching on YouTube. I wanted to do a little bit of a fun segment here. We have summertime. We get to do some of these legacy segments and get to look at things in the history of Auburn athletics. And I've done these throughout the summer and even some in the spring. But on today's show, I wanted to dive into Gene Chizik's legacy. What is Gene Chizik's legacy? I was only 7 years old in 2010. So I was born in 2003. I just turned 22. I was only 7 years old. So I was, Gene Chizik was hired after Tommy Tuberville in 2008. So I was only 5 years old when Gene Chizik was hired, I believe. So I don't remember much about him being hired. All I can remember is that Auburn hired the coach from Iowa State. It's a good thing that social media really was not, it was starting to become a thing, but really wasn't a thing in 2008. You had message boards, you had the Paul Feinbaum show, and I'm sure, although I can't remember and wasn't really able to process it at the time, I'm sure this hire caused quite a bit of controversy on the Paul Feinbaum show and on Auburn message boards. But man, if you thought the hiring of Brian Harsin was controversial on social media, if you thought the hiring of Hugh Freeze was controversial on social media, I cannot imagine this hire taking place in the year 2025 and seeing how Auburn fans might react to this. Gene Chizik was hired from Iowa State. He went 5-19 in his tenure at Iowa State and was hired at Auburn. He was awful. He was awful at Iowa State. Now, I understand he had been the defense coordinator, a successful defense coordinator at Auburn in the past, so there was that connection. But, man, I would hate to have been someone who was a part of this decision-making process, or even Gene Chizik, and been on social media if it existed the way it does now back when he was hired, and seeing the type of comments that would have been out there on this hire. It would not have been received very friendly. But Gene Chizik ultimately won a national championship at Auburn. He went 8-5 in his first year in 2009, and Auburn won the Outback Bowl. So it was a solid start to his tenure, taking over for Tommy Tuberville. And then, of course, 2010, in year two, Auburn goes 14-0 and wins the national championship. It looks like an absolutely genius of a hire. Auburn goes and wins a national championship in year two under a head coach. And again, remember, this was before the transfer portal. This was not a time where it was easy to revamp a program. And Tommy Tuberville didn't lead the program in ruins like Brian Harsin did. But still, this was not an era where this was all that common. I know Nick Saban was able to turn around Alabama fairly quickly, but again, you're talking about the greatest coach of all time, as much as that may pain me to say. So this was incredible what Gene Chizik accomplished in bringing in Gus Malzahn as his offensive coordinator, signing Cam Newton out of JUCO, went from Florida to JUCO, Auburn giving him another shot, landing him, recruiting at an elite level that Auburn was recruiting at a top 5 level at this time, bringing in guys like Nick Fairley and Michael Dyer and Trevon Reed, among others, and having such a successful team so quickly was extremely impressive, and it made this look like a great hire. But then, 2011, Cam Newton leaves, you go to 8-5, okay, not great. That's where you started in 2009. You won a national championship. People expect that now, year in and year out. So you to fall back to 8-5, that's not great. There's going to be some frustration in the fan base. Well, then Gus Malzahn leaves after 2011. Gene Chizik decides to roll with a more pro-style offense. And 2012 rolls around, and Auburn goes 3-9 in what was one of the worst years in the history of Auburn football, one of the worst years in the modern history, really, of Auburn football. And then Gene Chizik ultimately is fired because of that result in 2012. So what's Gene Chizik's legacy? It's tough. It's a tough question. It's a complicated legacy, to say the least. He is one of two Auburn football coaches to win a national championship. Pat Dye is widely regarded as the greatest Auburn football coach of all time. He didn't win a national championship. Now, some would say Auburn should claim a national championship during the Pat Dye era, and I wouldn't push back on that. I do think Auburn may have gotten screwed a time or two, and that maybe Auburn should claim a national championship in 1993. But of official national championships, only Shug Jordan in 1957 and Gene Chizik in 2010 have won national championships at Auburn. But you also have to reckon that with the fact that Gene Chizik also coached one of the worst teams in the history of Auburn football in 2012. And that's what makes his legacy so complicated. You take out that 3-9 season, even with the 8-win seasons in there, his legacy is pretty great, and he's probably seen as one of the best coaches in Auburn football history. If you just take those 3 seasons of 2009, 2010, and 2011, and you stop it there, let's say Gene Chizik decided to retire, he's probably regarded as the best coach in Auburn football history, even if it was just 3 seasons. But because of that undefeated season and that national championship with Cam Newton, he's seen it in a completely different light. But that 2012 season leaves such a big stain on his legacy that it complicates the picture. So how should he be remembered? I think he has to be remembered as a legend for Auburn because he won a national championship. But we also can't ignore the 2012 season. That was an embarrassment, and that should never happen at a university like Auburn, at a program like Auburn. It's inexcusable. It should never be that bad. So yes, he should be honored. He should be welcomed back always, and he has been. And Auburn fans should be grateful, because if you're going to blame him for 2012, you also have to give him credit for 2010. There were more factors at play than just him in 2010, just like there are more factors at play in 2012 than just him that led to the failures of the 2012 season and that led to the success of the 2010 season. But you have to be fair in your assessment of him. Give him credit where credit is due and criticize where criticism is due. But we're 15 years now, this upcoming fall, from that season. And I'm sure Auburn will do something to once again honor and celebrate that 2010 season, as they should. And Gene Chizik should be welcomed with open arms. There's a banner of him holding up the national championship trophy on the back of Jordan-Hare Stadium that I see every day on my way to campus when I'm headed here for work. I think he is remembered fairly fondly, but again, it's just complicated. It is complicated because of that 2012 season, and so that's where I fall. Honor him, respect him, appreciate him for winning that national championship, but that doesn't mean that Auburn fans should just ignore 2012. He's responsible for that, but he shouldn't be held in such contempt that you're not able to honor him and appreciate him for that 2010 season, because again, as I pointed out, a lot of people want to give credit just to Cam Newton or just to Gus Malzahn, and certainly they deserve a ton of credit. But Gene Chizik was the head coach, and if you're going to blame him for 2012, you also have to give him credit for 2010. And he's not alone in being essentially one-hit wonders as head coaches. We know Ed Orgeron at LSU in 2019, similar results, not quite to the level of failure that Gene Chizik had after winning the national championship, but things weren't pretty for him after the 2019 season too, so it makes it complicated for those coaches. But I would say Ed Orgeron is fairly well loved by the LSU fan base, and I think for the most part, Gene Chizik is still liked by the Auburn fan base. If I'm not mistaken, he still resides in Auburn, so I think he is respected and is appreciated by the Auburn fan base, and I think that's what his legacy should be, the 2010 national championship, while also having the caveat of the 2012 season in there. That's where I fall. You may differ from me on that, and that's completely fair. And that's ultimately where I land on Gene Chizik. Okay, back to the modern day of Auburn football. I wanted to address the news from this past week, I believe it was now, Malcolm Simmons, Auburn sophomore wide receiver, was arrested and charged with domestic violence on account of strangulation. We don't know any more details than that at the moment that I am recording this episode. He is still on the Auburn football roster as of this moment. Again, I'm recording this on Monday afternoon. As I'm recording this, he is still on the roster. That could change by the time you're listening to this. Auburn did release a statement saying they were aware of the incident and were gathering facts. Besides that, there's not been much more said from the university or from Hugh Freeze at this moment. I'm going to wait for the rest of it to play out before I offer any more commentary on that situation. But if you didn't know, if you had not seen the news, I wanted to make sure I included that in here. Okay, with that being said, let's discuss the Vanderbilt game. This game is in November, in the back part of the season. This is the third to last games, I think game 10 of the season for Auburn football. Auburn will travel to Nashville, Tennessee to take on Vanderbilt yet again. Clark Lee enters his 5th year at Vanderbilt, last season having his most successful season by far as the head coach of the Commodores. Vanderbilt went 7-6, beat Alabama, of course, last season, and beat Auburn in Auburn 17-7. This game was rough. This was an ugly game if you're an Auburn fan last season. Auburn's offense was atrocious in this game. Clark Lee is a defensive-minded head coach. He had Auburn's offense all confused, and Auburn could not get anything going in this game. The story, of course, focused on Diego Pavia because he had beaten Hugh Freeze already twice as the quarterback at New Mexico State. Well, he came into Jordan-Hare Stadium, and Auburn really did a good job defending him. He did not have a very good game against Auburn, but Vanderbilt's defense was too much for Auburn's offense, and ultimately, Vanderbilt won this game. And guess what? Diego Pavia's back. He's back again. He's beaten Hugh Freeze 3 years in a row, and he'll have a chance to do it for the 4th time. Unlike Diego Pavia, typically he actually was very humble when asked about Hugh Freeze and beating Hugh Freeze the last several years at SEC Media Days. He was complimentary. He did say that Clark Lee had discussion with him about trying to make sure didn't talk as much trash as he has in the past. That's just his personality. That's what makes him fun for college football, unless, of course, your team loses to him, and then you probably dislike him a little bit. But he's a great personality for college football to have. He sued and got an extra year of eligibility. So he is back, and so are 2 of Vanderbilt's biggest offensive playmakers from last season, in Junior Sherrill and Eli Stowers, who are both really good players and could give Auburn issues this upcoming season. They do have 4 of their 5 offensive linemen this year will be new guys, whether they're transfers coming in or guys who did not start last season. So that is going to be a big deal for an offense that is a spread option offense. It can be a little bit complicated, so new offensive linemen there. We'll see how that plays out for them offensively and whether or not that affects them. Defensively, most of their parts do return. Most of their players do return from last season, which will be big for a defense that was fairly solid last year by Vanderbilt standards, at least. This is an afternoon kick in Nashville, Tennessee. Auburn, it really shouldn't matter what time the kickoff is. It is November, so it should be cooler weather. And Auburn will have more fans than Vanderbilt fans there. I went to Nashville and covered the Auburn-Vanderbilt game my sophomore year when I went to Vanderbilt last in Hugh Freeze's first year, and Auburn won this game. Auburn probably had 80% of the fans at this game. Now, because of the year Vanderbilt had last season, it might not be quite that big of a crowd advantage for Auburn, but nonetheless, Auburn will still have an advantage. Auburn has a massive alumni base in Nashville, so I would expect that home field advantage should not really be a big deal in this game. Auburn should be just fine. If anything, Auburn should have the home field advantage. And this is a game Auburn should win. Auburn should win this game. Hugh Freeze should end the Diego Pavia curse this upcoming season. But should does not necessarily mean will, and Auburn's going to have to play well. Vanderbilt is going to be a well-coached team. They're going to be a disciplined team, and their offense is difficult to slow down and is difficult to stop, as we've seen the last couple of years. This won't be an easy game, but Auburn should win this game. If Auburn is going to have the season that it's capable of having, it has to win this game on the road at Vanderbilt. And also important to note, this game is homecoming for Vanderbilt. When I saw that, I was a little bit taken back. So, as if Auburn needed any more motivation than the fact that you've lost to Diego Pavia at least 2 years in a row at Auburn, if you're the coaching staff that's been with Hugh Freeze 3 years in a row. As if you needed any more motivation, well, here is some. It is homecoming for Vanderbilt. That should add a little bit more motivation if needed. So that will be a fun one in November. And on next week's show, we'll get to previewing the final game of the regular season. That will be, of course, the Iron Bowl. So we'll have that on next week's show. Okay, to close out this week's episode, I wanted to revisit the Talkin Tumors Tantrum Meter. We did it a few weeks ago, and we landed at 4. That was the number I went with. That was when we were in the midst of the angst over Auburn's recruiting strategy and how poorly Auburn was recruiting. There was a lot of frustration. But some things have happened since then. Auburn has landed a few recruits. Now, Auburn's recruiting is still not in good shape. Auburn is still way, way, way below where they need to be for this upcoming cycle. But they have landed a few recruits. That has helped calm the waters a little bit. August is almost here, and that's when official offers that we've talked about can actually go out, offers on paper. Auburn thinks that that'll help pick up the pace a little bit for them in recruiting. I have my doubts, but we will see. But then you also had SEC Media Days that took place last week, and Hugh Freeze did well. He set expectations high. He had a sound that was more confident than we are used to hearing from Hugh Freeze over the last several years. And so I think fans are feeling a little bit better, for the most part, about the season than they might have been feeling a few weeks ago. So therefore, I am lowering the tantrum meter down to a 2. It's not at a 1. It's not at the 1. There's probably some that are still at a 4 or 5 or maybe even above that. But I think the vast majority of the fan base is fairly pleased right now. Everybody's excited. Everybody's thinking positive. Season's coming up now in a month, so I'm lowering it to a 2. But again, come August 29th, after that game, if Auburn loses to Baylor, it'll be up at a 9. So I think that we're at a 2 right now. Everyone's pretty happy and excited about the season. Recruiting could be better, and you still have the fact that the last couple seasons haven't been successful, and that's why it's not at a 1. But I have it at a 2 right now. I think it's about as good as Hugh Freeze could hope for at this moment in time, because based on the circumstances with recruiting and how the past seasons have gone, I think for the Auburn fan base to be at a 2 right now is the best that he could really ask for. So that's where I am putting it today. Again, we'll keep updating it. I don't know if we'll have another update before the season kicks off, but we'll certainly keep it updated as the season rolls on here when we get into it on August 29th when Auburn kicks off against Baylor. But that will wrap us up for this week's edition of Talkin Tumors. Thank you all again for listening or watching. If you're watching on YouTube, really appreciate it. Again, if you haven't already, please ask that you subscribe to the show and like it. Next week will be a massive show for us. We will have a full fall camp preview. Auburn begins fall camp on July 29th. That is just over a week away from today when I'm recording this. So we will have a full fall camp preview looking at position groups, looking at the team as a whole. It's going to be a lot of fun. I cannot wait to do that. So be on the lookout for that on next week's show. That'll take up the majority of the show, I'm sure, next week. And who knows what other news will happen in Auburn athletics before then. We know things are never quiet. Even in the summertime, there's always news pertaining to Auburn athletics. We will have that, whatever that might be, on next week's edition. But for now, this is Talkin Tumors, and we'll see you again next week. Thank you for listening to Talkin Tumors. If you liked what you heard, make sure to subscribe and follow @Talkin Tumors on social media so you'll never miss an episode. War Eagle.